The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft blue when the plane leveled off, the quiet hum of engines blending with the gentle breathing of passengers drifting into sleep. Seat 8A held a man who looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. His head leaned against the window, one arm crossed protectively over the small boy curled beside him. The child's hair was messy, his cheek pressed into his father's jacket, a tiny hand still clutching a worn toy airplane with one wing bent from too much love. The man's name was Daniel Hayes. Most people on the flight saw only what was obvious: a single dad traveling alone with his son, economy class clothes a bit too practical, shoes scuffed from use. What they didn't see were the calluses beneath his sleeves, the faint scar at the edge of his jaw, or the way his body never truly relaxed, even in sleep. 3 years earlier, Daniel's world had collapsed into silence and paperwork. His wife, Emily, had died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, leaving behind unanswered questions, unopened messages, and a 4-year-old boy who asked every night why mommy didn't call anymore. Daniel had learned how grief sounded at 3 a.m., like a child crying into your chest while you tried not to cry yourself. He had left the Air Force shortly after Emily's death. The uniform, once a source of pride, had begun to feel heavy, like it carried too many memories. He took a civilian job repairing avionics systems, work that kept his hands busy and his mind just occupied enough to survive. Flying as a passenger was rare for him now. This trip wasn't for work. It was for closure. They were heading to Arlington National Cemetery. Emily's parents had finally decided to move, and they wanted Daniel and his son, Noah, there to help scatter a small portion of her ashes at a memorial service. Daniel had rehearsed calm answers for Noah's questions, practiced steady breathing for his own sake. He had promised himself nothing unexpected would happen. Life, as usual, didn't listen. Noah stirred slightly, mumbling something about clouds. Daniel adjusted the blanket over him without waking him, his movements instinctive and precise. The habits of a former fighter pilot never really disappeared. They just waited. Up in the cockpit, the mood had shifted. Captain Robert Miller had been flying commercial jets for over 20 years. He'd seen turbulence, medical emergencies, unruly passengers, and the quiet panic that crept in when systems didn't behave as expected. At 35,000 feet over the Rockies, one of the warning lights blinked, not red, but amber. Not catastrophic, but wrong. A sensor fault in the flight control system. Then another alert followed, sharper this time, accompanied by a vibration through the controls that shouldn't have been there. The first officer ran through checklists with disciplined calm, but Captain Miller felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Redundancies were failing in a way that didn't match the manuals. The autopilot disengaged without warning, and the aircraft dipped just enough for passengers to notice. A few heads lifted. A few murmurs spread. In seat 8A, Daniel's eyes snapped open. The shift in the plane's attitude was subtle, but to him it was unmistakable. His body reacted before his mind caught up, heart rate rising, senses sharpening. He listened, not just with his ears, but with his bones. The engines sounded normal, but something was off in the rhythm. He felt it the way a musician feels a wrong note. Noah stirred again. "Daddy, I'm here," Daniel whispered, forcing his voice to stay gentle. Just a little bump. The seatbelt sign pinged on, followed by an announcement that was calm to the point of being rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Our crew is taking care of everything." Daniel didn't relax. Up front, Captain Miller made a decision that went against instinct but aligned with experience. The plane was stable, for now, but if the control degradation worsened, they might need help. Regulations allowed it in extreme cases. Pride had no place at 35,000 feet. He took a breath and pressed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came again, still calm but carrying a new weight. "This is an unusual request. If there are any certified combat pilots or military flight-trained personnel on board, please notify a flight attendant." The cabin froze. People looked at each other, unsure if they had heard correctly. A woman gasped softly. Somewhere near the back, someone laughed nervously. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Noah looked up at him, confused. "Daddy, what did the captain say?" Daniel brushed his son's hair back. "He's just asking a question, buddy." His mind was already running through scenarios, hydraulics, fly-by-wire anomalies, partial control loss. He hadn't flown an F-16 in years, but the knowledge was carved into him. Muscle memory didn't care about time. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, scanning faces. When she reached row 8, Daniel met her eyes and gave a small nod. "I'm a former Air Force pilot," he said quietly. "Fighter jets." Relief flickered across her face. "Thank you, sir. Please, come with me." Daniel hesitated, looking down at Noah. The flight attendant crouched slightly. "Your son can stay here. I'll make sure he's safe." Noah's eyes widened. "Daddy." Daniel knelt, gripping his son's shoulders gently. "Hey, I need to help the airplane, okay? I'll be right back. Mr. Thompson is right across the aisle. He'll sit with you." Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man who had been pretending not to listen, nodded quickly. "I've got him. Go." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. He pressed his forehead briefly to nose. "I love you. Don't be scared." "I'm not," Noah lied bravely. Daniel followed the attendant toward the cockpit, every step pulling him further from the life he'd tried to leave behind. Inside the cockpit, Captain Miller turned as Daniel entered. The captain took one look at his posture, the way his eyes moved over the instruments, and felt something ease inside him. "Captain Miller," he said. "This is Daniel Hayes," Daniel replied automatically. "Former Major, USAF. F-16, F-15 cross-trained." No introductions were needed beyond that. They got straight to it. Daniel leaned in, scanning displays, asking precise questions. His voice was calm, steady, the tone of someone who had faced worse odds at higher speeds. "The control lag is intermittent," Daniel said after a moment. "Feels like a software conflict between redundant systems. You're fighting the computer." "That's what it feels like," the first officer said. Daniel nodded. "Let's reduce automation. Go as manual as you can without violating procedure. The aircraft wants to fly. We just need to stop confusing it." They worked together, methodically, the cockpit filled with focused energy. Turbulence hit, sharper now, and the plane shuddered. In the cabin, passengers gripped armrests, prayers whispered in dozens of languages. Noah sat very still, Mr. Thompson's arm around his shoulders. He stared at the bent-wing airplane in his hands and imagined his dad fixing the big one outside. Minutes stretched thin. Then, gradually, the vibrations eased. The controls responded cleanly again. Altitude stabilized. Captain Miller exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. "We'll divert," he said. "Nearest suitable airport." Daniel nodded. "Good call." The landing wasn't smooth, but it was safe. Tires screamed, reverse thrust roared, and the plane slowed until it rolled to a stop surrounded by emergency vehicles that glinted in the sunlight. Applause erupted in the cabin, raw, emotional, relieved. Daniel stayed in the cockpit until the engines shut down, until procedures were complete. Captain Miller turned to him, eyes shining. "You saved a lot of lives today." Daniel shook his head. "We all did." When he finally stepped back into the cabin, Noah was already standing, scanning faces. The moment he saw his father, he ran. Daniel dropped to one knee, catching him in a fierce hug. The smell of his son's shampoo, the warmth of his small body, it grounded him more than anything else could. "You fixed it?" Noah asked. Daniel smiled softly. "Yeah, buddy, we fixed it." Passengers reached out as Daniel passed, hands touching his shoulder, voices murmuring thanks. He accepted them politely, but his focus never left the boy holding his hand. Later, as they waited for a new flight, Noah looked up at him with quiet seriousness. "Mommy would be proud of you," he said. Daniel's chest tightened, but he nodded. "I hope so." As the sun dipped lower outside the terminal windows, Daniel realized something had shifted inside him. He hadn't just helped a plane land. He had been reminded of who he was, not just a grieving husband or a tired single dad, but someone capable of stepping forward when it mattered. He squeezed Noah's hand gently. Life would still be hard. Grief wouldn't vanish, but sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, purpose found you again, right there in seat 8A, when the world asked if anyone was ready to stand up. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to pause and reflect. We often judge people by their clothes, their seat number, or their silence. But inside every person lives a story. A story that, at the right moment, can save lives. The man sitting in seat 8A was not just a tired single father. He was a warrior, someone who had endured loss, carried pain. And still, when the world needed him most, he stood up without hesitation and without applause. This story reminds us that heroes don't always wear uniforms. And sacrifice is not always visible. Sometimes the bravest person in the room is the one quietly holding his child's hand. If you are going through a difficult chapter in your life, remember this. Your struggles, your experiences, your survival. One day, they may become someone else's hope. If this story made you feel something, please like the video, share in the comments what this story taught you, and pass it on to someone who may need a little hope today. Because sometimes, one story can change a life.